What up, though? Welcome back to the Mic Check Podcast. This is T Word, the People's Champ. Thank you for tuning in and joining. Today, we're going to talk about the 118 to 126 pound division in boxing. But before we get into the video, go ahead and make sure you subscribe. And then when the video's over, go ahead and leave a comment and give me your thoughts. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can get an update when all this dope ass content is being dropped on your head. You hear me? So, we're going to go ahead and talk about the bantamweight, super bantamweight, and featherweight divisions in boxing and the recent shakeup that's going to cause a stir at the different divisions. So before we get into that, I wanted to address a particular conversation I had on Twitter recently about the depth of certain divisions. So to give you a brief version and full disclosure, I've recorded this video once before and the audio didn't come out good. So we're redoing it now, okay? All right, so I've already put my thoughts together. And the first thing I want to talk about is a lack of depth at 118 when you compare it to divisions like 135 pounds or even 147 and 154 pounds. Now, when you do the comparison here, the main thing you're looking at is how deep can you go in a division before you get into either too many prospects or just not true title contenders or guys who are beyond their prime. So the first thing you look at 118 is the king of that division, who's recently moved up to 122 pounds, is Naoya Inoue, also known as the Monster. He was the best in the division. I would say that 118 has about 5 super talented guys that could at any point in time be unified and have a nice long reign. And then you also add in Nonito Donaire, who's on the back end of his career at 40 years old, but he's still a power puncher and a guy who can still move. They call him the Flash, and he can show that in the ring. Anybody besides, I would say, Inoue at 122, he would get him a tough out and probably win. You start to look at guys like Butler, who Inoue just beat for the belt, and you just don't really see a lot of depth in that division. I think you could go 5 deep. If you go up to 122, you could probably push that to 6 to 8 guys. And then at 126, you probably round out a nice 10 to 12. Now, when you get into lightweight at 135 and you get into 147 and even 154, you could go 10 to 15 guys deep, and you're just going to start scraping the prospects. You're going to have, let's say, your champion or champions, depending on which division we're talking about. And then you're going to have 4 or 5 guys who could really challenge for that belt and get the champion hill in the ring. And then you've got another 6 or 7 guys after that are considered just under contender, maybe fringe contenders. And then you've got your prospects that on the right night could give hell. You're talking about Keyshawn Johnson. This dude could really do something. Abdullah Mason. These are guys who you put them in there with a contender, and that contender might see themselves tumble out of the rankings or tumble further down the rankings after facing one of these guys. So that's something to consider when you talk about depth. And I wanted to explain that without having to go too deeply into which people are good and which people are bad, because that's too subjective. Every division has guys that have 3, 4, even 5 losses and about 30 or so fights. And that doesn't mean that they're a bad fighter. They've just been fighting the best competition, which is something that we've been wanting in boxing. So when you look at the lower weight classes, you have to give them credit that the best tend to fight the best, not named Gary Russell. That's all I'm saying. That being said, I do want to talk about the bigger news that's going on around those 3 divisions. So first of all, we'll start at the higher division at 126 pounds. Ray Vargas is attempting to fight up at featherweight at 130 pounds. So he could potentially vacate his 126 pound belt owned by the WBC. That being said, Stephen Coolboy Fulton is going to be challenging for an interim spot in line for that belt against, in a rematch, Brandon Figueroa. This will be the second time around for these guys, and they're going to have a vacant title shot on the line. There's questions about what's going to happen if Fulton is able to win that fight. In the lower weight class, you have the Monster, who moved up from 118 to 122, and he's going to be challenging at some point for the WBO belt because he was the super champion at the 118 pound division. So he's got an automatic title mandatory spot at 122. He's already been moved into the top 10 of the ring rankings. So people are expecting him to make a splash immediately, right? So let's talk about how these pieces of this puzzle fit together. Number one, you're going to have a lot of guys vying for 4 vacant titles at 118. So the Nonito Donaire's in the conversation, Paul Butler's in the conversation, and a few others. So this division is going to get really hot really fast. So if you're interested in the smaller fighters, this might be a good time to start watching with detail. And if you're not, just take a look. You might find some really interesting fights. These guys really let their hands go, and there's not a gang of power punchers, so you don't see a lot of moving and shaking and dancing around. You see a lot more engagement. So this might be a really good division if you like to see some really exciting fights. And there may even be some guys that come up from 115 now that the monster doesn't hold those titles. Think about that. All right, so at 122, you've got MJ, who's the WBA and IBF champion, and then you've got Stephen Fulton, who's the WBC and WBO champion. These guys really need to match up and have a undisputed fight, which is unlikely to happen for a while because Fulton is engaged with Brandon Figueroa at 126 fighting for that interim title, which might become vacant, which might see one of them elevated. If Fulton is to win, he'll have some questions to answer on what he wants to do next. But let's say that fight doesn't exist. Let's focus on 122. So Fulton can either, after Figueroa, because we're pretending that's not happening, he can either go ahead and take on Inoue while MJ ties up his end of the street and tries to retain his belts in a matchup against Tavalis. However, you're going to see somebody face him to come after those two belts. It's either going to be Fulton or Inoue, in my opinion. And then the loser of the Fulton Inoue fight might get a chance to do a rematch, and they'll get a chance maybe at undisputed. We don't know what's going to happen between MJ and Inoue if they fight. We don't know what's going to happen between Inoue and Fulton. These are two really good matches, two different styles for him to see. I think MJ is a little bit more tailor-made for Inoue, and it'll be a little bit easier to fight, and Fulton is more slick and elusive, and that might cause some problems for Inoue, just like Inoue's power might cause some problems for Fulton. So it's going to be a really interesting dynamic at play. We don't know exactly what Fulton is going to do if he does achieve champion status at 126. I've got it in my mind that it's a lot faster path to undisputed if he'll go up there and fight and come right back down and challenge for undisputed at at 122 instead of trying to start from scratch with a single belt at 126. So I'd love to get your thoughts. Again, this has been T-Word with the Mic Check Podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. And until the next time, I'm out. Peace.